Very nice to be here. Of course, we had to take out a loan to get to down here, you know, with the gas prices and so forth. Yeah, maybe that loan will come through. Well, in October of 2017, we went to Israel for 2 weeks, and it is a journey of a lifetime because it is perfectly safe, and you walk in the same path that Jesus walked, and that is very special. So we did a Trafalgar tour. It was a guaranteed tour, so no matter how many we had, the tour was a go. And there were 13 of us, which was a blessing because everybody had their own seat on the bus. And the guide here, Mark Dettelman, did a fantastic job of that tour. A tour guide can make or break a tour. And if you have a good one, that's a blessing. So here is Israel in the eastern part of the Mediterranean. And this little sliver of land that you see right here in yellow, that is Israel. They're surrounded by Egypt and Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Syria, and over here is Lebanon, right about here. So we flew from Chicago to Madrid, and then from Madrid to Tel Aviv. It was 24 hours to get there totally. Because 4 hours to drive to Chicago, 2 hours to wait, 8 hours flying, 3 hours to wait, 6 hours of flying, so it was 24 hours. And our trip basically was from Tel Aviv, where we got on a bus and went 45 miles over to Jerusalem. And then we stayed in Jerusalem for 4 days and did some things down here, then went up to Tiberias, and the place where Jesus was for many years, and then over to Caesarea, and then down to Tel Aviv. So there is Israel compared to New Jersey, and the size of Wisconsin. It's about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of Wisconsin. And you think of Muslim and Muslim, they are the same, like buffalo and bison, they're the same, followers of Islam. Here is Israel in yellow, and the Mediterranean. They have a port that is open to the Mediterranean, and a port, Eilat, that is open to the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. And then, of course, they are surrounded, if you will, by Arab enemies. Hopefully that does not go into war again. The population, almost twice of Wisconsin, not quite. And the language, the time, the new Israeli shekel. My name has a couple of C's in it, so it's not pronounced the same, but it's not spelled the same. And we don't have that many shekels, you see. Yes. We stayed at the Dan Panorama, which is a very nice hotel in Jerusalem. Dan was one of the tribes of Israel. That's where the name comes from. Very modern. And the eating was good. One thing that surprised me, if you wanted to put honey on your pancakes, you went over to where this dripped honey came into there and you scooped it up. I had never seen that in the United States. There was our guide, Mark Dettelman, with my wife and myself. And the first place they're going to take you is Mount Olive. That overlooks the old city of Jerusalem. And the Temple Mount, which is right here. And down here is the Garden of Gethsemane in the Kidron Valley. So this is called the Dome of the Rock. It's inside the domed city, the old city, what they call the old city of Israel, of Jerusalem. The mosque is actually right there. And in that Dome of the Rock is a big rock. And we were not allowed to go in there. I think you have to be of the Arab extraction, if you will, to go there. And it was closed to tourism. It's said to be the rock in which Muhammad ascended into heaven. Also, it's said to be the rock in which Abraham was to sacrifice his son. God said, no, don't do that. So here's the old city again, the Garden of Gethsemane. Gethsemane means oil press, and there's a huge Jewish cemetery down here. There's the walled city. Garden of Gethsemane is where Jesus prayed the night before the crucifixion, and the apostles fell asleep. And there's 70,000 Jewish extraction people of the Jewish race there, buried there. And of course they have the tourist things. You could pose by this gentleman and have your picture taken, but if you did, he put his hand out, he wants a few shekels, you see, okay? You could ride on one of those camels as a tourist. We didn't do that, but this gentleman from Ohio did. And they're playing backgammon there. Now, the old city is divided into the Muslim quarter, the Christian, the Armenian, and the Jewish quarter. The Armenians said to get their own quarter because of the extermination of the Armenians by the Ottoman Turks, I understand, right before World War I. There are 6 different gates to go into. We went into the Lion's Gate, which is sometimes called St. Stephen's Gate because St. Stephen was the first martyr in Christendom. As a matter of fact, one of those that witnessed that killing was of St. Paul, Saul at the name of St. Paul. And we're going to take the tour called the Via Dolorosa, the Way of the Cross. So we come in the Lion's Gate here, and we're going to roughly about a half a mile to the Church of the Sepulchre where Jesus is buried. And along the way there, we're going to go through the Stations of the Cross. Now, in the Catholic religion, Stations of the Cross is a big thing. There are 14 ways of the cross or Stations of the Cross. And they have numbers there. This is number 1, where Jesus is condemned to death. And then they have a little chapel, a small church by most every one of those Stations of the Cross. In Station 2, Jesus is made to carry the cross. And they always have the police around. We felt very safe. They have these enclaves here where they'll have maybe a dozen or so policemen, and they will go out and patrol 2 at a time. So it was kind of nice to see that there. You don't see that in America there, see? Police are in stations. Okay. Now, Station 3, Jesus falls for the first time, and there's a little chapel there too. And in Station 4, Jesus meets his mother. And Station 5, Simon of Cyrene is made to carry the cross. He fell, so the Roman soldier says, "Hey, you come on over here." He was like a nobody, a commoner. He wasn't of any import, but his name will go down in history because he helped Jesus carry the cross. In Station 6, Jesus, let's see, Veronica wipes the face of Jesus. And matter of fact, you have a little inscription there of that same thing there. In Station 7, Jesus falls for the second time. And then stations roughly from 8 on, they're inside, they're not outside. So in Station 8, he meets the mothers of Jerusalem. In Station 9, he falls for the 3rd time. In Station 10, he is crowned with thorns, and then he's stripped of his clothing, crowned with thorns, and then in Station 11, this is where that happened, so Station 10. But you go inside, and that's where he is nailed to the cross, and he dies on the cross. And it's inside. It's not like Mount, when you go to the Holy Week, you think that's going to be a mountain there, but it's all inside a church, which I thought was kind of unusual. 12, he dies on the cross, and then 13, he is taken down from the cross, and then where he's laid in this tomb there, and that is a very sacred place because you see people will go there and they're laying there, they're weeping, they take their handkerchiefs and wipe over it, they leave offerings. I was able to touch it. I had to shove the tourist out of the way. And then that is where the burial chamber is. Very ornate, very well done, nicely done. And this map here shows the path of Jesus. Now, up here is Galilee, where most of the time Jesus spent his early years. And then you have Samaria in the middle, and then Judea down here. And the Jordan River runs down through into the Sea of Galilee, and then eventually into the Dead Sea. It doesn't go any further. That's where the water ends up. And so you have, for example, Bethlehem is right about here, and Joseph had this dream that his son was going to be killed, so Jesus, Mary, and Joseph escaped and went over to Egypt for a few years, and then they came back right about here. When they went down to Jerusalem, they would take paths such as this along here, and so Jesus spent most of his time up in this area there. We went to the tomb of David, and David, of course, played the harp for Saul. He later became the king of Israel. The airport is named after him. And oddly enough, the women go in one side and the men go in the other. For some reason, I was not able to understand that. And there is the statue of my wife and myself there. We spent some time on the areas there where we ate lunch there. And falafel is a very delicious dish that they serve. It's much like Taco John. It is a bread, and then there's chickpeas and some meat in there and vegetables and so forth. So that's a very common dish for people to eat there. And then, of course, you had your tourists. You could buy these things from a man, scarves and satchels and upper things like that. Went to the upper room. That's where they had the Last Supper. There's the upper room right here. There's no table in there. So you just walk around, and your guide will give you a lot of information about the upper room with the Last Supper. Then we went to the Wailing Wall, or called the Western Wall, and that is a very sacred place. It's for the Jewish people. My understanding is that's close to, like, for the Catholics would be St. Peter's, you see. And the Israelis captured that in the 1967 war. As a matter of fact, our guide pointed out the bullet holes that was surrounding here. You can still see those from the 1967 war. And you had your gendarmes there, ensuring the peace. Now, the Wailing Wall is built on the Temple Mount. The first temple was built around 1000 BC. It was destroyed by the Babylonians in about 500 BC, 560. And then it was destroyed again by the Romans in about 75 AD. And so that becomes a very sacred place. The Jewish people, they can write little notes there. They can read the books, the sacred books there. And they can put those little notes in crevices like this, prayer notes. And you'll see them up their hands against the wall, like that. Very devout. So we spent a little bit of time there. Then we went to Masada on the second day, and so we go from Jerusalem, we go about 25 miles down to Masada. It's about 25 miles here, and Jerusalem is around 2,400 feet above sea level. The Dead Sea is 1,400 feet below sea level, so you're going down about 4,000 feet in about 20 miles. And of course, you have your three languages. You have your Hebrew, and then your Arabic, and then your English there. And so the signs are usually in all three languages. Now, the Masada is in the West Bank, so you have to go through checkpoints. So we'd stop at a checkpoint. Our guide would talk to the guards. Once in a while, they'd come onto the bus. It just took a few minutes, and away we would go. And it's very arid. It's very dry. The roads are very good. They drive on the correct side of the road. And there's Masada. Now, that was built as a retreat for Herod the Great. He built it around 330 BC, and then his son, who took over, that was Herod Antipas, took over from his daddy, and The Romans came in and, well, the Jewish revolted in around 60 AD, and they were without Roman rule for 4 or 5 years. And then the Romans came in and slaughtered, just literally slaughtered the Jewish people. A few of them retreated to the mountaintop here, around 900 of them, they call them zealots there. And then Lucius Flavius Silva with the 10th Legion surrounded Masada. They built a wall around it, and then they started building a ramp. And so here you see is Masada right here. There's their base camp right here, and they build a siege ramp to the top there. This is around 65 AD, roughly. I have those figures there, but I don't want to read them there. And there's a pictorial showing what they were doing. This is just from a postcard right here, building this wall, this ramp up here with a siege engine. And imagine the horror of those people living up there. They knew what was going to happen, and they would not be able to survive. So they were really, the men would all be killed, the women sold into slavery, and children sold into slavery. So the thinking is that they all committed suicide. There might have been a few survivors, and they were captured. Now this is the way it looks today. Here's that route there going up to the top there. And you can walk up there, right here, you can walk to the top, but our guide wouldn't let us do it. Besides, it was almost 100 degrees. We took the cable car. Much better for us people that are beyond 50 years old. I'll be 80 next week. Yes, getting up there. Okay, then up there it was quite hot, but our guide would sit us down and he would talk about the Masada. He had a long narrative history of it, very interesting. And then we walked around and showed various places there in their top there. This is a storage area. They survived up there because they had wells. They caught water, so they had no problem with water. They did grow some vegetables up there, and they had a lot of eggs from birds. There's some of the rocks from the siege engines there. And that's the way it looks today. There's a well down here where they had water. Looking out, here's the sea, this is the Dead Sea back over here. They had hot water here. The Romans had hot water here so that they had baths there. And the floors then were, because it would get quite cold at night, they had heated floors there then. It's interesting because today, every young Israeli, man or woman, has to be in the military. Typically, a young man or young lady will finish high school, they'll travel for a year. Sometimes, most of the time, overseas. Then they come back and go to college, then they have 3 years of military service. And every young recruit is taken to the top of Masada, and that's where they take their oath. They'll say, Masada will never fall again. See? There's the cable car. Then, of course, we had to go to the Dead Sea. That's about 10 miles north of Masada there, along the Dead Sea. This is Jordan over here. The Dead Sea is about 60 miles long and 8 miles wide. And of course, we were told to bring our swimming trunks because you just have to go to the Dead Sea. So there's me walking out to the Dead Sea and swimming here. Now it's interesting because you can't drown in the Dead Sea. You have to hold your head underwater to drown because it's about 10 times as salty as the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. And if you're laying there, you can't put your feet down. You know, it's usually in water, you can put your feet down and start to swim. The only way you can do anything is to turn over on your tummy and start swimming. But if you do that and you get salt on your lips, you feel it because it's very, very salty. These 3 ladies here and their mother are from New York. They're Jewish. And of course, they had to, that was their first time to Israel. And they were bubbly kind of people. And so they took a mud bath right there, yeah. Now they do get magnesium, potash, potassium, and then mud for cosmetics. If you go to a spa anywhere in the United States and they do a mud bath, likely they got that mud from the Dead Sea there. It's supposed to have a fine grain or something to it. Takes 10 years off your life, ladies. Okay. Yes. All right, so here is, again, the Mediterranean. This is the West Bank, the disputed West Bank. There's the Dead Sea. And, of course, Jerusalem is right there. Tel Aviv over here. And on the way back, he points out the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they were found by shepherd boys in 1947 in those cliffs there. And the next day, when we go to the museum, we see some of those Dead Sea Scrolls. We know a lot about what went on at the time from those scrolls there. Then the next day, we went to Bethlehem. And Bethlehem is in the West Bank. So you got to go out of Jerusalem proper, which is Israeli, and go into the Palestinian area there. It was a beautiful day. We had beautiful weather every day, except it rained a half a day when we were at the museum. And at Bethlehem, before you go into the nativity site there, they have a number of big, almost church-sized altars there, dioramas or statuettes and so forth. Beautifully done. Many of them donated from other countries. So we visited each of those, read the inscriptions, and then you go into the Church of the Nativity here, and you have to go through the Gate of Humility right there. It's only 4 feet high, and the reason it was built that way is not to keep looters out, but to keep horses, men on horseback, from riding in there and looting. So it's called the Door of Humility. You have to dip down. There were quite a few tourists there, but our guide got us right through where he wanted to go, where Jesus was born, in the stable. Much different than the pictures that you see today. There's the stable where Jesus was born, right behind this framework right here. And then outside is the Church of St. Anne. And that's where, if you watch the Midnight Mass, the Christmas Midnight Mass, that's generally where they do the Christmas Midnight Mass, is at the Church of St. Catherine, I should say. Now, there's that wall they built. Right around here, you see it sneaking around here, right around here. And since they built that wall, they've not had any terrorist bombings. They've been quite safe about it, because they used to have people get on buses with bombs. They blow themselves up and blow up the people on the bus. They've not had anything like that happen since they built the wall. Here you see it going around here. Then, of course, if you get out of a place like that, you have to go through the souvenir center, or the gift shop, if you will. And that was very interesting because they had beautiful stuff made. Much of it made, that's the Cross of Jerusalem there. And then much of it was made from olive trees, olive wood, carved. You could buy it and then send it to your house if you would. It was pretty expensive. Okay. And then in the parking garage, they had enough things that you could buy also. Oh, KFC, of course, is that, you have to have that, okay? Oh, I like this one, Stars and Bucks Cafe, okay? Is that a knockoff or what? Okay. Our last day in Jerusalem, in the morning, we went to the Yashim, the museum, the Museum of the Holocaust. And it's built in the form of the letter A. And then you go back and forth from the rooms, one room to another, as you sneak your way through there. And in the middle, they have this dome with pictures of those that were killed in the Holocaust. And they said they have like 4 million names of the 6 million that were said to be Jews that were said to be murdered by the Nazis. They have names of about 4 million. And they keep adding more all the time as they find out. Some artifacts there. And then we get out of there, and now we're going to travel north. So we go back down east out of Jerusalem, down into the valley, and travel north up to Tiberias. So we're going to be right about here, and we're going to travel right along the Jordan River up to Tiberias. We passed Jericho. The walls didn't come tumbling down though this time. No, they were there, still there. We passed a lot of farms, date trees, palm trees, and we go to one of the kibbutzes. This one here had about 600 people living there, and our guide there told us about it and gave us a tour there. They have a huge dairy farm there. People live in individual houses and they work, and they found the Israeli Air Force, the Israeli Air Force pilots are said to be some of the best in the world. Highly trained and highly disciplined and highly motivated. And many of them, if not most of them, come out of the kibbutzes because they learn to work as a team. This is what we were told. And I kind of think that's true. One of these houses belonged to Exal, who was the prime minister from 65 through 68 or 69. He was the prime minister in the 67 war there. The guy told us that this cactus here is sort of nicknamed the mother-in-law cactus. He says it's rather prickly. Okay. So to Tiberias is a modern city. It's about the size of La Crosse, around 40,000 people. And it's the only big, large city on the Sea of Galilee. We stayed at a hotel. This is looking down into the Sea of Galilee. And the next morning we go to Megiddo, which is an archaeological site that is about 20 miles roughly from here over to there. And it is an archaeological site. It is very historic. Saul was, and it's on an ancient trade route in that valley, it's the Rio Valley. Saul was defeated by the Philistines in 1000 BC. Alexander the Great went through there in 350 BC. In 1800, Napoleon's army went through there. In World War I, General Alexander was on his way to defeat the Ottoman Turks in World War I. So it's very historic. And on that trade route is a high hill called Megiddo. This is, you can actually look into Haifa from there, and you can view their diggings. It's an active site where they're doing, archaeological site where they're doing a lot of work yet. That is Mount Carmel there. It's very rich in agriculture around there. And, oh, you had to get on this sculpture and ride that. Then we had lunch. Went back to the Sea of Galilee and had lunch. At this restaurant here, which I can't pronounce right here, but if you're by the Sea of Galilee, what do you think you have to have for lunch? Fish, yeah, so we had fish right there, see? That's how we ate the fish. Now, I didn't like the fish looking at me, so I covered him with a napkin right here, okay? So we had fish and rice. Okay. I thought it was overpriced, but what the heck.
Larry, when we ate the fish, by the time we got it deboned, there was very little fish left.
Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of fish there, okay? Then we went to Capernaum or Capharnaum. They pronounce it two different ways, but it's the house where, it's the place where Jesus was born. He lived when he was a young boy. So there's a big church there. It overlooks the Sea of Galilee. This is St. Francis, and it's a beautiful place. Very nice, and that's Jordan over here. St. Peter, because St. Peter and Jesus and some of his brothers lived together in a house there in Capernaum. And then I walked along, if you could choose, you could walk along a path here, and you're walking in the same footsteps that Jesus walked. Not too far from where he walked on the water out here. Personally, I think he put big rocks out there, a little bit below the water, so he stepped like this. That's my own view, but as a boy in church, a 12-year-old boy in church, we hear these miracles, and I'd try to figure out how they really did it, you know. I shouldn't be doing that, but I did. This is where St. Peter and Jesus lived. Then we went to the Golan Heights. Now, the Golan Heights is right up here. It was contested. It was the Jewish people, the Israelis captured it in the 1967 war. And they've kept it, and they're not going to give it up. Because from the Golan Heights, you can look down into Syria, you can look down into Jordan, you can look down into Lebanon. And so there was an extremely hard fighting going on when the Assyrian army, with their many tanks, attacked on the Golan Heights there. So you're going up several thousand feet. There's one of the bunkers from the 1967 war, and a memorial there, beautifully done. And some of the area there. In October, it's pretty dry. Our guide told us that if we came back in a month, that would all turn green because you're going to get the rains there. See? There's still mines out there. So they said, well, you stay on these paths and don't go off the path because there's mines that have not been deactivated or whatever out there. We obeyed them. Okay. And that's one of the highest places there, and you can read the inscriptions and so forth. Okay. It is a very poignant place for the Israelis because when the Syrians were on the Golan Heights, they would rain artillery down on the Jewish Israeli settlers. Then the Sea of Galilee that's fresh water. I mean, the Jordan River runs into it. And we went to the place that they call Manna in the Galilee Museum. And there they have a replica of a boat, a fishing boat, at the time that Jesus was there. As a matter of fact, here is one they raised many years ago and brought up, just the remains of it there. So after through the museum, we got on this boat. It looks like a rust bucket, but it's a very nice boat. And instead of taking the bus back to our hotel in Tiberias, we took the boat. And they played songs, they had dances, and a guide talked about it and so forth. A very special day for us. Then we went to the Church of the Annunciation at Nazareth up there, and we spent about a half a day there. It's an octagonal church there, and in this church, a priest was giving some information to a group there. And this is said to be the place where the angel Gabriel told Mary that she was to be the mother of Jesus. Then we went to the Mount of Beatitudes. Now the Mount of Beatitudes is up on a huge hill, and it's a little bit northwest of the Sea of Galilee. From there you can look down on the Sea of Galilee. A beautiful church. And the Beatitudes are on a path, and you can read those as you walk along. We talked to this nun for a while. She was in her close to 90 years old. She was a nun from Lebanon. There you see the Sea of Galilee there in the background. I think we ought to send one of these over to Putin today. Yeah. He could use one of those. Yeah. Now that's from a postcard. When we were there, it was more brown than green. That's from a postcard also. But the flowers were real and beautifully done. That's what it looked like when we were there. Sort of brown. It was going to green up after some time. Then we went to Zerfat, which is an art colony, and Marc Chagall did many of these right here. And Nikki Imber was a artist. Here is his well-known statue called Hope. And here he is, where he died in 1995. But here he is, making a continuation of a huge one there, him working in his studio there. Nicky Imber is interesting because he was an Austrian artist, and in 1938, when Germany annexed Austria, he found himself in Dachau. And being in Dachau, he didn't want to stay there, so as an artist, he took some paper, put sand on it, a face mask. He stole a uniform from the SS, and he walked right out of camp. And then you never heard of that happening before. So that was interesting. Then we went to a synagogue. I had never been in a synagogue before. They showed us the books, the readings and so forth, the Torah. And the vendors. And then we went over to Caesarea, which is on the coast of the Mediterranean, a very modern city, a huge seaport. So we went up to the top and looked over the city there. Of the cities in Israel, Tel Aviv and Caesarea would be your, or Haifa, the port would be your modern cities there, Haifa. Yeah. Now this looks familiar there, Reverend, right? Right there, yeah, he did some archaeological diggings here. Here's the amphitheater right here. This is from Roman times. And the parade ground where they did their chariot racing is right around here. So our guide told us, sat us down and told us a little bit about it. It's actually a part of a national park for the Israelis. And here is a Roman archway left from Roman times. This is from a postcard, but it shows it more close up there. A viaduct, if you will. A viaduct or aqueduct, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then you and I pronounce it acre, but our guy pronounce it aker. You know, aker. Well, that's okay, because it is a site built by the Crusaders in around 1500 or so. That's for the temple to the Baha'i religion. I understand they have one on every continent. In our continent, it's Chicago. Then we went down to Tel Aviv, a very modern city. That's where we started from. That's where our plane landed. And a little bit of the life there in Tel Aviv. This is where Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated. And they have coming down these steps right here. And they have a statue of him there, like that. A tree growing out of a rock. Okay. Then this is an ancient historical site. They have the Gate of Egypt there. It goes back 3,000 years before the time of Christ. So there's Israel itself. It's just more green over here because of the lower elevation of with the Mediterranean and so forth, and of course the Dead Sea is very prominent there. We went to the market, had lunch with some of our companions. This August, that'll be 57 years with the same woman. Yeah. Yes. Okay. I told her years ago I was going to trade her in for two 20-year-olds. She says, "Oh, you're not wired for 220." Yeah, it's probably about right. Okay. Yeah. Jewish life. We went to Tel Aviv has a Catholic church, St. Peter's. That's the pulpit there. That's a big one. Some of the holy days and holidays, the Sabbath from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. No cars, no fire, no shopping, no electricity, no cell phones, no TV. You light 2 candles, take a walk, you reheat the food. This is the elevator there in our hotel. There's a Shabbat elevator. Now that elevator is for people of the Jewish faith. You get on it, you don't touch anything. The doors close and you go one floor at a time and you get off whenever you want to. The doors will close and then you go up again, that sort of thing. Because that uses electricity and they're not to use electricity during that period of time. There was other elevators for us Gentiles. Yeah. The Sukkot is a feast of festivals, and when we were there, that was on at that particular time, and they sometimes will build little houses. They also make sacrifices. They buy these things here, and then they take them to the temple. Here's the Jewish people buying those and taking them there to worship. So the tabernacles that they build, you can, if you wish, live in those for 7 days. And if you live in those for 7 days, you're doing sacrifices, indulgences, if you will. A different menu. So one day we were there, we didn't have any hot food for breakfast. And so it was okay, we made do. There's our bus driver, Itzan. Okay. And a little bit about War and Peace. Well, in May of 1948, I think it was May 15th, at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Truman said that we are going to recognize Israel. Within hours, armies from Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt attacked Israel. And the Israelis were very much unprepared because they didn't have much. They had built up supply of ammunition in their houses, but they scrounged, they bought things on the black market, and they survived. They survived, doesn't it? The Israelis were told over and over that the Arabs were going to drive them into the sea, but they never did. That was the War of Independence. In 1956, then Nasser in Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal. The British didn't like that, the French didn't like that, and the Israelis didn't like that, so they had the 1956 Suez-Sinai War. The Israelis captured the cyanide, that huge hunk of sand. They did give it back. The 67 war is the war that they gained the Golan Heights and they gained entry into Jerusalem. And if you read accounts of that, when the soldiers broke through to where the Wailing Wall was, many of them went up and started wailing. They were so overwhelmed that they had finally captured a place they had been kept out of for 2,000 years. It'd be like, say, Catholics couldn't go to St. Peter's, something like that. Say. The Yom Kippur War is when they almost lost their nation because the Russians had supplied the Arabs with SAM missiles. So the missiles were being used to shoot down the airplanes, and Golda Meir, who was the prime minister at the time, she was so desperate, she called up Nixon and says, we're going to be overwhelmed and overrun within a few days. And if we don't get some help, we're going to use nuclear weapons. That was the rumor anyway. And so the United States sent huge amounts of supplies, ammunition, guns, tanks, and so forth, and they were able to maintain their nation. Now, I call this the CBS, Carter, Begin, Sadat. They had an accords in 78. They signed a peace treaty. Then I call this one the CAR. That's Clinton, Arafat, and Rabin. And that was the Oslo Accords in 1993. This is where, in the opinion of many people, including many diplomats, that was the best chance that the Arabs had for two states, a Palestinian state and an Israeli state. And Arafat threw it away. Clinton was so angry that he later said, he caused me to lose the Peace Prize. Well, maybe. The Mossad is the secret police of Israel, and they're said to be very good. They're like our FBI, if you will, or maybe CIA would be closer, because FBI is mostly domestic there. They pulled off some fantastic things. Adolf Eichmann was plucked out of Buenos Aires in 1960, brought back to Israel, put on trial, and hung. And that whole story of how that team went into Buenos Aires and cased the place for a number of months and flew him out is a fantastic story. Eli Cohen was a Mossad agent that actually infiltrated into the highest depths of the Syrian military. And there's been many movies made about that and documentaries. He was finally caught because most every few days he would use a telegraph, a Morse code, and we'd be sending information back to Israel. And they finally caught him by using rangefinders and detectors and so forth. He was sentenced after being tortured, and he was hung. But the information that he gave to the Israelis was very instrumental in helping them win the 1967 war. Then the raid on Entebbe was a fantastic one too. A number of movies made about that. In '76, a Air France plane landed there in Entebbe, Uganda, and they let go all of the non-Jewish people, and the Jewish Israelis were held in a sort of an abandoned airport, close to that. So they got up a raid. They sent 2 C-130s, one loaded with troops mostly. The other 2 had some vehicles in, including a look-alike Idi Amin limousine. And so they carried off that raid. They did lose one man. The brother of Netanyahu was shot by a man in a tower, and so they did lose one man. But they rescued all of those people there. Life in Israel, well, of course, you got to do McDonald's. I don't think, Anna, we've been to Europe, 8 or 9 times. I don't think we've ever been to a country that did not have a McDonald's. But you could get McDonald's kosher. See, okay, I don't know really what that means. Okay, yeah. Yeah, okay. Now, this is the West Bank. It is a huge area, and here is Jerusalem, right here, okay? There's the Jordan River and the Dead Sea down here. And that little enclave right there is the one that is highly disputed. If we take a closer look at just that little place right there, it looks like this. And in red, that's where you have the wall. The sort of the maroon here, that's where you have Jewish, or rather Jewish or Israeli settlements. The sort of the tan here, those are the built-up Arab places. Probably the one you hear most about is Ramallah there, okay? And so the old city of Jerusalem right here, and of course looking over the old city right about there is the Mount of Olives right there. So the dispute is not so much over religion as it is over land. And when we were there walking through the old town, the old city, you could hear the mosques. They called them to prayer, I believe 5 times a day. You would hear that. So some places they have like concertina wire separating Israel from the West Bank. In other places, it's just a sort of like this with cameras there. So the capital, that's been disputed, as you know. It was made, Jerusalem became the capital in 2017. Trump was president. All those early presidents said they were going to make Jerusalem the capital. They never did, but now it is. So there's a gasoline. Well, we're getting up there. Come Labor Day, we'll be there. Or Memorial Day, yeah. The cars are mostly small cars. The gasoline is pretty expensive. Their big thing is, of course, tourism. A lot of pilgrims, like Anna and I were like a pilgrim going there. And you spend money there. Their alphabet, I think their alphabet has 23 letters instead of 26 like ours does. And this is a typical typewriter here for us, but this is their typewriter. And it's backwards. Their language is backwards. In other words, here's a letter that I wrote to Merritt, our granddaughter, and right here. But then I had to translate it into Hebrew, and you read it this way, backwards, which was kind of odd. Talked about this a little bit. So it's kind of neat. You'd see jeeps with the young Israeli soldiers around, and it was really neat to talk to them. They'd talk about where they had traveled to, what kind of families they had. Very open, very conversational with people. And there's our group. And that's the end. Okay, well, thank you. Thank you very much. How many have been to Israel? Oh, a number of you have. Okay, how many mistakes did I make? I can read all those things, all the dates and so forth, but I'll get close enough, and that's all right with me. Any questions or comments? Snide remarks? Yes.
Yes, you just, the last slide, it said they had to be in the military from 18 to 36.
That's, yes.
So they aren't in the military, they can do.
Oh, yeah. On active duty, I was told it's 3 years, but the reserves go from there till age 36, yeah. Now, the big controversy in Israel is if you're ultra-Orthodox, you don't have to serve in the military. And there's a lot of people there that don't think that's fair. Okay, so, any other questions? Yes. Well, we did a 2-week tour of Germany, 2 weeks in Israel, 2 weeks in Germany, Israel, Norway, Scotland, France, through Italy, New Zealand. I don't know,
We did Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg.
yeah, one of the Benelux countries there, called the Heart of Europe. Went to the church where my great-grandfather was baptized in December of 1828. That's kind of special that you go back that far. He came to the United States in 1858. His wife-to-be came on a separate boat. They settled in northeast Iowa, and they had 4 children. 3 of them died of diphtheria, 2 on the first day. Then they moved south about 10 miles and bought a farm and had 10 more children. Yeah, and then one of those children, my grandfather, had 16 children. And then my father and mother had 9 children. There's 8 of us still left. And my wife and I had 3 children. And one of those has 2 children. Isn't that kind of how it goes? 15 to 9 to 5 to 3 to 2. Okay, our grandson probably won't have any. The way things are going. Yes. Yes.
When we had the Sabbath, we didn't realize, we went down for breakfast, and we got the food, and scrambled eggs were cold, and I thought, well, the thing must have been on flight. Well, because we can't use electricity, you can't cook, so they were from yesterday.
Yeah, cold scrambled eggs are not bad if you're hungry. Yes, they're good. Yes, they'll do. Yes.
That Masada situation you're talking about, the zealots there weren't necessarily the nicest people in the world.
I understand, yes,
They,
that's right.
When they left, when the Romans kicked them out, they were up there for, like you said, 2 or 3 years. They used that as a base
Yeah,
to go off and raid.
they'd go off and raid.
Raid their Roman convoy.
Uh-huh.
And then they sent Peter O'Toole and his armies to get, that's a tenth of humor and it failed.
Yeah, yeah.
That was seventh Legion?
The 10th Legion, yeah.
But there's a movie called Messiah,
Yes,
and if you're interested, it's pretty accurate.
yeah. Yeah, I've seen some documentaries on this, and I've seen that movie there, yeah. But even though they were not the nicest of people, they didn't deserve to die. That's why I look at it there, yeah. And the Romans weren't especially nice, they crucified people. That's not nice. Yes.
I was just curious, was the majority of your trip, was it through tour guides or your individual plan?
No, we were with a tour guide all the time, and I wouldn't want it any different. If you're in Israel, where things can be very uncertain, we don't want to go off by our own. Yeah, and the tour guide is going to take very good care of you, because if there's incidences where people are getting shot, that's not good for tourism. And those Israelis, they like their money. Oh yes.
Did you have any pickpocketers?
No pickpocketers,
I
no.
don't think there's any
no.
crime in Israel.
So
Oh,
you.
they have no gambling there, there's not allowed. Late at night, 10, 11 o'clock at night, the Israeli families are out, the kids are out playing and going up and down the streets and so forth. Yeah.
So you began your trip with somebody else planning your trip?
Yes, it was a Trafalgar tour. So you signed up with a Trafalgar. We've done, what we've done ones with what other companies?
We've done
Insight.
In Ireland, we've done a lot of Trafalgar and a lot of Globus.
Globus, we've gone with Globus a number of times, and every one of them has been very
They've all
good.
been very good, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
when
Thank
you
you.
go with a guide, especially when you're in a country where they don't speak the language.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to be without a guide. The other thing is if you have a medical emergency, they will take care of you. Like we had a man in this one trip where they went to take a picture of the whole group and he backed up and didn't realize there was a barbed wire fence behind him and cut his hand, so they took him to the hospital. You know, things like that happen. You don't want to be over there by yourself, not knowing how to fix it.
Yeah, when we were in Italy, it was a 2-hour wait to get into the Colosseum, but our guide took us right in.
Yeah.
And we were in Amsterdam, it was a 2-hour wait just to get tickets to go into the Anne Frank Museum, and we got right in.
Yeah.
The guides have it set up with those people over there, so you don't have to wait in line. Same thing at the Windsor Castle,
They take
as
really
ones I
good care.
remember there, yeah.
And the other thing, when you do a bus tour, you meet some interesting people. Like a lot of you from Australia, Canada, different countries, but a lot of.
Yeah, that's one of the nicest things is you talk to people from other countries, you talk about their politics, their sports, you know, what they did for a living. And it's very nice. I think on one of our tours, Ann and I and another couple were the only Americans. Most of them were from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Indonesia.
They tell you about places they've traveled also, and they say, if you go there, make sure you see this, you know, stuff like that. And then every night at supper, we would be together with these people, and we tried to sit with different people, because it's just so fascinating.
Yeah, that's one of the neatest things about being with a tour. Plus, I remember our first tour was England, and it was a short one, like 7 days. And Teresa was our tour guide. And we'd be going down the highway, and she would talk about the educational system. She'd talk about the monarchy. She'd talk about the history, the fascinating history. So you learn all these things where you're just traveling in a bus, going from one place to the other. To me, that was very, very, very helpful, very fascinating.
I was wondering what nationality your tour guide was.
Well, he was from Canada, but he was Jewish. And he lived from 73 to when we went over there, he lived in Israel.